Birthing on your own country is the most sacred and the most important ceremony that we can do as women. It's actually my ancestral responsibility. My great-grandmother was a midwife. She used to birth babies along the river.
Mel Briggs is changing the way babies are born in her community, fighting for an Australia First Birthing on Country centre.
It's been very hard. 7 years of lobbying. I'm fortunate to be supported by a strong board of black women.
We fought really hard to get to this point where we can go to tables and people listen. It's back and forth to Canberra, back and forth to Sydney, meeting with ministers.
Sitting on the banks of the Shoalhaven River, you feel a long way from the country's halls of power. But there's a group of Aboriginal women here who fought to have their voices heard and wouldn't take no for an answer.
I've been a midwife now for 14 years. And I reckon I've probably been at over a few hundred births.
To many, she's known as Auntie Mel. This is baby Jarjum. She helped his mum Annie bring him into the world.
Because I remember in your pregnancy you were talking about, just being okay with the process.
It's her job to support women from her community through pregnancy, birth and postpartum. She's known Angel since she was a girl and just helped deliver her second child.
You get your known career midwife and then you hand over to another career midwife.
Very lucky.
Because that's not a model of care most Aboriginal women would get.
No, certainly not. And I wish everyone really got that opportunity that I had, because it was just such a beautiful experience.
Mel works for Wominda, a women's Aboriginal health service. She provides most of her care here, but delivers babies at the hospital. That's going to change. The organisation has managed to secure funding for an on-country birth centre run by Aboriginal midwives. They believe this will help close the health gaps for their women and babies.
When the women come in and they feel that and they experience that safe space and that safe place, it then encourages them to come in early for their pregnancy care. That's what reduces preterm birth, and that's what reduces stillbirth, and that's what reduces, bad outcomes because of the relationships you're building with women.
For us, it's about, the matriarchal way of doing things. Helen as a foundation, culture as a foundation.
We consider Wominda to be more than an organisation, we're a family.
It took years of lobbying state and federal governments for funding and legislation changes to get their birth centre.
There were so many things that were said about us. Who are they? How are they going to run a birth centre? How are their babies are going to die. There were so many negative things put on us whilst we were lobbying, but we just kept going. It's like, well, no, we actually love our babies.
They're now advocating for the voice to Parliament.
I think about the voice. I think about we've got a local voice for our community as Wominda, and we fought really hard to get to this point where we do. But then when I think about the voice that's enshrined within the Constitution, I think that's our voice but amplified.
Could not have given birth anywhere else, really. I'm comfortable here. I know everyone here, so yeah, I couldn't have given birth, not on country, really.
I don't think it was an option not to, for me.
G'day, my name's Tom Forrest. I'm a proud Yorta Yorta man from the East Kimberley region, and I'm on the streets to ask people if they think segregation still exists.
Well, yes, I believe there is segregation. There people have different mindsets and different opinions, toward different cultures, especially First Nations people.
The cultural divide is nearly as big as it's always been. We have not taken the time to connect.
I wouldn't say there's a formal sort of obvious segregation.
You know, you'll just notice security guards hovering around and you do feel, you know, like a bit of an outsider.
There is some segregation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, and obviously that's from both sides, because being an Indigenous person growing up having that history and knowledge of all the bad stuff what went on between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
A key survey tells us that around 3/4 of non-Indigenous folk don't live or work with Aboriginal people. So socially, we are still segregated. But most of us want to face the facts of our shared history. Just over 8 out of 10 people want formal truth-telling to occur.
What do you think about this question of segregation?
Well, I think it's quite a good idea. I like the old Abo, but my word is dirty.
You've got a little girl. Would you let her swim with Aboriginal children in a swimming pool?
My word, they'd be as good as what she is. Of course. You should. They're all children, they're all the same.
I think that the Australian Aborigine is equal to one of us. As you know, they were the first in the land before us, and I reckon that segregation against them is silly and ridiculous.
Unfortunately, that is where we are today, is because of the history. And although we, in 2023, we think that there should be change, but there is little change happening. I mean, the Closing the Gap program is failing Indigenous people. We're only meeting 4 targets.
Obviously, there's so many health differences, and there's so many barriers to health access, which it shows.
Well, I was part of the history of Australia in the 60s, and we were segregated, and Aboriginal kids were actually not allowed to do stuff like talking to non-Indigenous people.
What was it like when you went to school?
Oh, it was okay, but all us black girls used to stick by ourselves.
A few of them are nice and they're clean, they wear nice clothes and everything, but most of them are all dirty and everything.
And are Aboriginals allowed to go into the theatre?
Yes, they go in by that door over there.
And sit in a separate section?
Yes.
Well, I'm very upset by it. Every Aboriginal is. And this is one thing that every Aboriginal must encounter. There's no Aboriginal that is immune from this. Everyone encounters this at least once in a lifetime, that a door is slammed in his face.
Do you think any of that has had lasting effects in Australia?
Oh, 100%. You look at the stolen generation, which some of my grandparents were a part of. Obviously, it's pretty traumatising, and that's had a lasting effect on them.
We had common gates, were actually built to divide, Aboriginals from the rest of the caste systems, and that still kind of exists today, where we have reserves.
We've got a lot to learn.
Got a lot to learn. Yeah, we just don't seem to step on the bridge far enough.
Only when we trust each other can we build relationships, and only when we have good relationships can we actually work together to maybe address some of the issues that continue to face First Nations peoples.
The question is always asked, what happened to the Aboriginal people? This is the answer. This is what happened.
Dr. Jonathan Richards' groundbreaking research at the Queensland State Archives is forcing a difficult reckoning with the truth of our colonial past.
This is Rockhampton in the 1860s, and it's 3 officers of the Native Police and 2 Aboriginal troopers.
Jonathan has uncovered little-known information about the Queensland Native Police. They were men under the command of white officers who waged a war on the frontier.
How would these Aboriginal men have been recruited?
At the point of a gun. You can either join us and live, or you can die. But it is important to remember that a lot of the Aboriginal troopers deserted, and at times they were deserting faster than they could be recruited. And it's something that really speaks volumes about what those Aboriginal men thought once they realised what they were expected to do. The government then began removing Aboriginal people to reserves and missions so that Europeans could then take the land and farm it, like your family.
So you can track the dispossession and you can track which families benefited?
Absolutely, yeah.
The records in these archives were key to solving a family mystery of my own. I'd discovered a colonial era photograph album among my late aunt's possessions. And what stood out was a photo of two Indigenous women dressed as maids. I spent months trying to work out who they were and what happened to them.
Oh my gosh, Helen, unbelievable. Unbelievable.
So tell me, who is she?
My mother, Mariah Cousney.
And that's the Laughing Woman?
That's the Laughing Woman.
Do you know anything about her being stolen at 14, taken away?
No, I knew nothing.
Did you know that she worked for my family?
No, I did not know.
And she never spoke about this?
No, never. Never spoke about anything.
But it's not hard to piece together the details of Mariah's life. Born to an Aboriginal mother and a South Sea Islander father, she was an Inaggai woman from the Longreach region, born around 1900, 3 years after the Queensland Government passed an act to forcibly remove Aboriginal people from their traditional lands. The act allowed the Protector of Aboriginals to control, monitor and carefully document every aspect of their lives.
It says that Mariah Cousney, your mother, was to go and work for my great-grandfather, Henry White, for 10 shillings a week at White Hill Station. She wouldn't have got those wages.
I wouldn't think so.
So when I look at it, I think, well, there's my family.
Yes.
Getting rich off stolen land.
Yeah.
And forced labour.
Yeah. Yes.
And here's all the kids.
It's all his family.
10 children.
So she brought these up at that age.
I would say.
They would have really bonded to my mother at that age, you know, with being with them all the time.
Yeah. My family exploited your mother.
I don't think my mother ever held anything against anybody that she worked with or whatever happened to her, because she made her own life.
I guess that my family owes a debt of gratitude to your family, because when they came from England and Ireland, they had nothing. They were pretty much illiterate. And off the back of the work and the knowledge of country that your family brought, my family is educated and where we are today. So, does thank you seem the right thing to say?
Yeah, of course it is, Helen. Of course it is. Of course it is. Of course it is.
A few years ago, when you started the work of encouraging Queenslanders to explore their history, I rang you up and I told you about this photograph. Can you remember what you told me?
You certainly needed to find them, because these, up until that time, were nameless women. Certainly we saw their faces, but we didn't know about them or their histories or where they came from.
We spent a long time talking about what words the family wanted to hear from me, whether it was "I'm sorry" or an acknowledgement of history.
I'm a generation away from Lorraine, and had you come to me, I would have wanted an apology, whereby she didn't. And my mother probably would not have wanted that either, because they say that, you know, people of that generation can't be responsible for what happened today. In fact, I think it's quite the reverse, because the beneficiaries still benefit from the theft of Aboriginal land. I know years ago I only thought our people had the stories, but you know, I know through the reconciliation process that I love that whitefellas got stories too, and whitefellas need to tell them and need to you know, build those bridges with us.
My mother would be smiling down on us now. I really mean that. We won't forget each other.
We won't.
No. No, we're sort of family.
My country goes from La Perouse, Bidjigal country, down to Jerrinjan country, and up as far as Braidwood. I feel my country. The land embraces you, it just looks after you, and you get a sense of belonging that this is your home. We're trusted with the welfare and well-being of the land and the waters. Being an elder, you've got a lot of responsibility to your community, to the country.
Auntie Vivian Mason is a Woolbunga elder on the New South Wales far south coast, one of many groups that make up the Yuin Nation.
Before colonisation, we had our laws and customs, we had our Dreamtime stories, we had our creation stories, and every group had their own version, and you respect that.
A connection to country is a universal emotion, which can be spiritual, political, or historical. This connection is often referred to as First Nations sovereignty. The Uluru Statement from the Heart specifically mentions sovereignty as a spiritual notion, the ancestral tie between the land or Mother Nature. It has never been ceded or extinguished and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. But sovereignty means different things to different people.
I don't like the term Aboriginal sovereignty. Anyone mentions sovereignty to me, I automatically think of a crown and I think of colonisation.
Well, Indigenous people have a very ancient culture, we know, dating back tens of thousands of years. The Western system of law, known as the Law of Nations, had another concept of sovereignty.
Kurrin Menang woman Hannah McGlade is a legal scholar specialising in human rights.
It was really about colonisation and the colonising nations and how they would take sovereignty, really, or acquire lands that didn't belong to them. And that's not something that Indigenous people in Australia or even globally were known to do.
The British did not recognise First Nations peoples had legal ownership over the land. For many, this perspective has never been accepted.
Always was, always will be!
There is a black sovereignty movement. They reject constitutional recognition.
Our sovereignty does not coexist with the sovereignty of the Crown.
4 decades ago, Palama man Michael Mansell called for sovereign rights.
We have been subject to an assimilation policy by the state government and the federal government.
In the 70s, Mansell petitioned the Queen for land rights. In the 1980s, created his own Aboriginal passport, which saw him travelling to Libya.
There was this massively exciting period where the Aboriginal movement in the streets influenced the international community, museums around the world, and prime ministers and the public.
So how does Michael Mansell define sovereignty?
Basically, it means the right of a distinct people to rule themselves on a given territory. We had that before the white people came here, and just because we haven't been able to express our sovereignty in the last 200 years does not mean we have lost it. It just means we haven't had the ability to carry it out in practice.
Mansell has his own idea of how Indigenous sovereignty can be recognised by the creation of a 7th state, made up of Aboriginal-owned native title lands across the country, with a remit similar to state governments, with its own governance over Indigenous affairs.
You've already got 7 sovereigns coexisting in Australia now, 6 states and the federal government. They're all sovereigns and they operate together. If you've already got 7 sovereigns, there's room for 1 more, which happens to be Aboriginal. And even though we would want to be different from the 6 states and the federal parliament, we wouldn't necessarily have to have a parliament, for example. We might rely on our own traditional forms of governance.
Dr. McGlade says Indigenous sovereignty may never be recognised by any legal system.
So it is about how are we negotiating with our government about the right to self-determination, to govern our own affairs. So it might not sound as glam as Aboriginal sovereignty, but it's really highly significant.
For many First Nations people, sovereignty never ceded is much more than just a slogan. It represents the continued survival of Indigenous culture.
The land was taken from us. You know, much as they take, we'll never lose our connection to it.
Hi, I'm Dan Borscher, the ABC's Voice and Referendum Correspondent, and I'm checking the pulse of the campaign. Joining me today is Fiona Scott, Senior Counsel at Premier National and former Liberal MP for the seat of Lindsay in Western Sydney. Welcome, Fiona. Thanks for joining me on Voices of Australia.
Thank you for having me today.
Western Sydney, where you live and work, is going to be pretty important. It's a very big population base, very diverse as well.
Yeah.
What's the tone of the debate where you are?
Look, I think Western Sydney is a really interesting melting pot for the debate because you have so much generational hurt and challenge there. I mean, I come from Darug country, yet you talk to some Aboriginal groups and Darug doesn't exist. And the reason Darug doesn't exist is because when colonisation first happened and Arthur Phillip came out, the Sydney colony almost starved. So it wasn't until they found the fertile river basin of the Nepean River, which is the only true freshwater river in the Sydney basin, that they were able to farm. But the Darug people who assisted that were one of the Aboriginal nations that were most impacted through death of smallpox and the flu and all of those things. Under New South Wales native title, they don't exist because you have to show continual cultural connection to the land for the last 240 years. Well, because of the flu, because of being displaced off their land, they don't, which means they won't get the voice. The voice is going to the Land Council, which is Darubin. I just personally feel, and the feelings of the aunties out there, is also that, you know, the Darug people deserve the voice. But until the Native Title Act of New South Wales is amended, they will potentially be depossessed second time over.
Well, I guess the thing it's important to point out is that we don't know how nation groups would be represented on the voice if the referendum is successful, whether it would just simply be through native title agreements or arrangements, or whether there might be a whole range of different models or mechanisms. Is that something where the Darug people would potentially be able to actually have a voice if Australians vote for the referendum?
Under current dynamics, probably not. It's an interesting history and it's an interesting dynamic, but I think it also highlights how unique and different every Aboriginal nation across Australia really is.
This week at the National Press Club, key No campaigner Nungai Warren Mundine took aim at the Uluru Statement from the heart.
What we describe as a symbolic declaration of war against modern Australia.
Is that acceptable or appropriate language in a debate like this?
We're all open to our own opinions, and I guess that's Warren's opinion. I choose not to believe that. I think that...
How did you feel hearing that comment?
Look, I think there's a lot of language on all sides that is divisive.
But this one in particular?
Look, I think that's not my choice of words that I would use. But
do you reckon it's helpful to the debate?
Maybe that's what Warren thought was right in his, you know, in his view and his perspective.
Uluru Statement co-author and constitutional lawyer Professor Megan Davis responded, labelling those comments from Warren Mundine as repugnant, offensive and full of Trumpian misinformation.
This is pretty baseline Trumpian misinformation, though. I think it really tips over into the line of unacceptable political communication.
Is there a thread here that is what is happening, that there is a misinformation campaign?
I'm not part of either campaign of that, so I prefer...
But you're watching closely.
Yeah, I am watching closely. I think referendum get through when you inspire the hearts and minds of people for what a better Australia can look like. And I think when you spiral the conversation into negative attacks, whether it's somebody that's made a negative comment and then somebody doubles down on the other side and criticise them, and it becomes this mass pile-on, I don't think we see Australia to the best.
What do you think Australia looks like the day after the referendum?
I'm worried about that. We live in a beautiful society, we live in a great country, a multicultural melting pot, and we've got comments like this being said. You know, how do we heal from that? How do we move forward? You know, how do we move forward in our reconciliation journey? If it's a no, what does that mean for our reconciliation journey? If it's a yes, and we have scores of Australians feeling like they're not included, what does that mean for them? The voice concept itself, I really do like it. And I think there is a place for it over and above what we know with all the disadvantage challenges, but to also preserve what is a very unique thing about Australia and an understanding of our landmarks and our communities and all of those things. I think there's such an opportunity, but I'm concerned at the moment with the way the politics is being run by other people and other people seeking advantages in it, where some of the smaller, weaker nations that, like Darug, that have been weakened by colonisation itself, are sadly going to be one of those nations that could be left behind in this process.
Fiona, Scott, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Helen. I was undecided at the beginning, but now I've learnt a little bit more about it, so I'm leaning towards the yes. I live at Bagot Community in Darwin. I'm one of the elders on the community. My clan group is the Mara Alawa mob from down around Nooka area. I had 10 children. 2 of my boys passed away when they were babies, so out of the 8, they've given me 37 grandchildren, and out of the 37 grandchildren, they've given me 45 great-grandchildren. I put them in categories of vanilla, caramel, chocolate and licorice because they go from black to white. It doesn't matter what colour you are, and if you're there talking for the one purpose, you all stand together. We have different communities, different areas all around Australia, so it needs to be that right person to be there that's talking for everybody else. It's got to be there for the betterment of all the First Nations people, but also everybody else in this country. There's a lot of people out there who still really don't know and don't understand what it's about. This is where we all need to stand together now and be as one. I think good things can happen out of this.